You're in a class, it's near the beginning of the semester, you write an exam or you hand in an essay and you don't get the mark that you desired. Okay, so what are your options? Well, one option would be, so you've hit an anomaly, things didn't happen the way you wanted them to happen. And so maybe you say, geez, that was a boring and stupid class anyways, this gives me an excuse to get out, and so that's not such a negative thing. Or you think, oh, well, I really better buckle down and study, and you decide to stay in the class. So basically what you've done is maintained your framework. I'm going to work through this class, but you've decided to modify some of the subroutines that make up that frame. You say, well, I should study more next time, or I have to prioritize this class compared to other classes. So it's a micro alteration within the overarching framework. But another thing you can do is say, to hell with the class, I'll just drop it. And so the advantage to that is problem gone. The disadvantage is, well, now you have a different problem, which is, okay, fine, you drop the class, do you have another class that you can replace it with? Is that a good way of dealing with a micro failure, you know, to move up a level of analysis and throw out the whole frame? Because you could also say, well, maybe I should just drop out of university and maybe I should go hang myself, you know. Well, it's the same line of logic, it's just taken up to a higher degree of abstraction. And so, generally speaking, you don't want to solve a problem by moving up a level and wiping out the frame within which the problem was experienced. You want to do that carefully, because in principle the frame that you were working within you'd already assigned value to it and worked at it. You've already invested in it. It's a big sacrifice to blow out the whole frame. Now sometimes you can do it. So anyways, what happens is, well, you get the bad grade and you're upset about it, and so you've been plunged from your happy, satiated state, let's say, into a state of relative chaos. And the chaos is, oh, I hit an obstacle, I didn't expect it, and now I don't know what to do. And so what does it mean to not know what to do? Well, it can mean I need to study harder. It can mean I should drop this course. It can mean I should major in a different subject. It could mean maybe I shouldn't be in university. It could mean maybe my future plans have been formulated badly. It can mean my future plans have been formulated badly because I don't understand myself very well and I've been telling lies about my past, right? The thing can really expand on you. And that's what the chaotic domain is. That's the re-manifestation of those things that you had considered irrelevant, right? Because when you go to pick up the exam, you've got your identity as a competent student intact. You're not questioning whether you should be in the course or whether you should be in that major or whether you should be in university. None of that. That's all in the implicitly accepted category. And as soon as the anomalous event emerges, all of those things that you had rendered axiomatic start to become questionable. And that's like the shark coming up from the depths to pull you down. And that's the classic way of representing that and of symbolizing it. That's Jonah and the whale, for example. So it's something is manifests itself from the deep unknown and pulls you under, like an alligator at a water hole, which is, I'm sure, one of the sources from which we derived that particular kind of mythological representation. Because you can imagine that when we were on the veldt, after living on trees, we had to go down to the damn water holes, and you've watched enough nature programs to know what a Nile crocodile can do to a water buffalo. It's not pretty. And so to go down to the water, the chaotic water, and the source of all life as well, right, is to risk an encounter with the terrible thing that lurks in the depths. And so we use that as a central metaphor for mapping the sorts of things that happen to us in a much more abstract space. And you know that because one of the things you're going to do, let's say that the professor, there's a professor obviously who gave you the bad grade. Okay, so one logical presupposition is that you're in some sense insufficient in relationship to the course. But another logical and instantaneous categorization is to throw that person into the category of malevolent predator. And you'll do that by becoming upset and cursing the person in your imagination. Okay, so you don't see irrelevant things. That's most things. You do see things that move you forward, and you do see things that get in your way. And in the class of things that get in your way are indeterminate occurrences, novel or anomalous occurrences. And almost everything that gets in your way is in some sense a novel occurrence. because you usually structure your behavior so that you don't go anywhere where something wildly anomalous is likely to occur. So if you encounter an obstacle, two things happen at the same time, and one is that your movement forward to your specific goal or sets of goals is blocked. But the second thing that happens is you're faced with a mystery, and the mystery is this thing wasn't supposed to exist, but it does exist. So what implication does that have for everything I think? And that's very, very hard on people. They do not like that at all, and no wonder, because it's the constrained chaos that's underneath everything, inhibited by your contextual knowledge, that suddenly popped its head up into your world. It's like the shark in the movie Jaws, which is of course a mythological story. It's exactly that, and it's exactly what that movie signified: a safe vacation paradise, all of a sudden threatened by some subterranean thing that can pull you down, and that destroys the peace and the harmony of that particular community. It's a dragon story. It's a hero myth. It's the story that people have been telling forever. And what you can think of that thing that reemerges, that shark that rises up from the depths, or that whale, or that dragon, or that predator, or the foreign invader for that matter, or the barbarian. They all fit into the same category. That's what had been deemed irrelevant suddenly manifesting itself. And when you think about how much is deemed irrelevant, the fact that it suddenly manifests itself, that's exactly the purpose, for the reason for the trauma. It's like, well, I've eradicated from my conceptualizations 99.99% of everything. It's zeroed out, and all of a sudden I've made a mistake. Bang! I don't know where I am. Well, what's relevant when you don't know where you are? And the answer to that is, since you don't know, everything is relevant. And you can imagine the sort of terror that people who experience paranoid schizophrenia are living in perennially, because what happens to them is precisely that. They undergo neurophysiological transformations that makes everything that they once depended on disappear, and everything comes back as relevant. And that puts them in the early stages of schizophrenia. That's extraordinarily stressful neurophysiologically. So they're overwhelmed with cortisol, and their brains deteriorate as a consequence of that. It's just too much. So, and unsurprisingly, right? Because you can hardly deal with anything, let alone with everything. Now, and often what you see, and it's rarely conceptualized this way in the training of clinical therapists, but often what you see when you are dealing with people who are in crisis isn't people who have a mental illness. In fact, in my experience, that's actually quite rare. What's far more common is that the person that you're talking to has become overwhelmed by catastrophe. So their life has fallen apart in some way that makes what they're doing actually impossible. So maybe someone very close to them in their family that they were depending on has developed a very serious illness, and that's thrown their entire financial state into utter chaos. Or maybe they've developed a condition that makes it impossible for them to work. Or you can imagine the potential range of catastrophes. And they're coming to see you because they're anxious and depressed. But the reason they're anxious and depressed is because everything they have ignored has popped its head back up and is hell-bent on their destruction. And often you see people who are being attacked by 5 or 6 of these monsters at the same time. And it isn't their mental illness that stops them from being able to deal with it, although that, whatever weaknesses you have are going to interfere. It's the fact that what they're facing is no damn joke, and if you were facing it, you'd feel exactly the same way. So then you're trying to come up with practical solutions to these tremendously complex problems. And that's well, it's extraordinarily difficult, generally speaking. People often don't come to a therapist until they've exhausted their entire range of resources. They cannot figure out what to do. And so, in a situation like that, you can administer antidepressants, and maybe that'll help the person increase their stress resistance. But and it may be that because they're depressed and have been brought down, that they are in fact exaggerating the danger of some of the smaller monsters that are after them. But making the person more stress resilient doesn't give them, for example, a new job, and it certainly doesn't bring back the person they've been living with for 2 years who has a degenerating neurological disease or some form of cancer. Like, these things are major. I often see people who, well, they're in a relationship, maybe they're rather isolated, older people, one of the partners is dying and their entire financial situation has become catastrophic. It's like, that's not a mental illness, man. I mean, they may have got into that situation because of one inadequacy or another, but you don't even want to push that too far, because that sort of thing can happen to anyone, and will in fact happen to most people in one form or another, at least at some point in their lives. So you want to be damn prepared for that. You want to be prepared for that, because it's bitter and harsh and anxiety provoking and painful. But if you're not ready, then it's also hell. And often you can stop things from becoming hell, even though you can't stop them from being bitter and painful and anxiety provoking and all of that. You can at least delimit the catastrophe enough so that it doesn't permanently bring you and the people around you down. And that's not so bad, right? That's a hell, or at least it's a lot better than the alternative. So this is the problem, you know, things object, things are obstacles. Well, how big is the obstacle? It's the same question as how big is the predator that's lurking outside the door of our cave. It's exactly the same problem, except conceptualized abstractly, and I would say exactly the same systems that your distant ancestors used to conceptualize the lurking predator are the systems that are activated now when you encounter the re-emergence of all the monsters that you've ignored. It's the same neurological platform. You think, well, how could it be otherwise? Because evolution is a conservative process. Everything about you is built on ancient foundations, right? Very little new, certainly very little radically new comes into existence. It's mostly tinkering with structures that have been around forever, like your body plan, for example. That's unbelievably old. I mean, you share that with lizards, roughly speaking, so it's incredibly ancient.